these words from the Reverend Hannah Roberts Villeneuve. Sometimes people ask, is pride a protest or a party? And the answer is, of course, yes. And why not? Why not rejoice as we resist? Dance as we demand change, celebrate as we create community that delights in all of who we are. So bring all of that with you this morning. Bring your policy demands, bring your glitter, bring the emptiness you feel for our siblings gone too soon. Bring your rainbow socks and your Gloria Estefan remix. Bring your tender hope for change. Bring your spirit tattered, battered by a world that seems insistent on choosing fear and hate. Gather up all these things and bring them here to a place where we don't have to shoulder these burdens or celebrate these joys alone. Come, let us worship together. As we prepare to light our chalice flame, I invite you, if you have your own candle or chalice, to do so in your own homes so that we can kindle a spark that spreads far and wide. The words of Lori Gorgeous Laban. We light our chalice flame for those who lived their lives in closets of shame, for those who furtively visited the bars where nobody knew your name, for the Stonewall riots and the fierce trans women who fought, for the plague which still takes far too many, too young, too soon. So many gone. So many never lived to see out gay kids singing on TV, out gay people serving in the military, marriage equality, families formed by intention. We light our chalice flame for all of these and for all our siblings of the rainbow, surviving, living life out in the open with pride. I invite you now to join me in saying our covenant words, first in English and then in Spanish. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humanity in fellowship. Thus do we covenant. La doctrina de esta iglesia es el amor. La búsqueda de la verdad es su sacramento y el servicio es su oración. Vivir juntos en paz, buscar el conocimiento en libertad, servir a la humanidad en comunión. Este es nuestro pacto.
Come unto me, sing in my Good morning, and I'd like to welcome everyone to this virtual gathering for our Sunday worship service at Emerson Unitarian Universalist Church. My name is Julie Borden, and I'm happy to serve as your worship associate this morning. Today's service is a celebration of Pride Month. Unitarian Universalism is a faith that, however imperfectly, has been working to be welcoming and inclusive of the LGBTQ community since early in the struggle for equality in this country, enacting supportive resolutions as early as 1970. This support follows naturally from our first principle, respect for the inherent worth and dignity of every person. So this morning we celebrate Pride and the progress that's been made over the past 50 years, including a major win this week in the Supreme Court. But we are not here to just cheer and celebrate, but to acknowledge the entire, often painful history of the struggle for justice and equality that has brought us to where we are now. So this morning, let us remember that LGBTQ Pride was born when people who were sick and tired of being harassed and abused by police officers rose up one night and said, "We won't take this anymore. We deserve to be treated with dignity and respect." This morning, we honor AIDS activists who fought to get treatments for a virus that devastated the community in the face of a government that didn't care about their lives. We're here to acknowledge the struggles on the road toward a greater love and a deeper justice that remain ahead of us. This morning, we remember that Pride has always been a celebration and a struggle. I'd like to welcome everyone who's with us today, all of our members and regular guests, everyone in our community. And I'd especially like to welcome anyone who's joining us for the first or second time. Maybe some of you have discovered us through these online services over the past few months. And we're glad to have you with us. And we will be very happy to greet you in person when we are able to meet in person again. So in any case, it's good to be together this morning.
So this morning, as part of our Time for All Ages, I want to tell you a little bit of the story behind the rainbow flag. Well, the rainbow flag was popularized back in 1978. It was created by the San Francisco artist Gilbert Baker. And the original Pride flag flew on the at San Francisco's Gay Freedom Day parade celebration on June 25th, 1978. And from there, its popularity spread around the country. And indeed, around the world, it has been taken up as a symbol of LGBTQ pride. And the rainbow, of course, from our earliest recorded histories, has often been considered a symbol of hope. And so that's one of the reasons that the rainbow was chosen for the LGBTQ community. And I think a lot of people actually think that the colors represent the diversity of the community. And so that's the reason for the spectrum, is that it encompasses the diverse spectrum of who we are. And indeed, I think that meaning works. But Gilbert Baker, the man who created it, actually had specific meanings. Each color had a specific thing that it referenced. Life, red was the color of life. orange, the color of healing, yellow, the color of sunlight, green, the color of nature, blue represented harmony or serenity, and purple, the color of spirit. And so I think it might actually seem a little strange to go like, well, what are these things? Life, healing, sunlight, nature, harmony, spirit. What do they have to do with being a queer or a trans person? And what Gilbert Baker had in mind is that, you know, queer people, trans people, gay people, lesbian people, bisexual people, all of us lived whole, rich, full lives, just like everyone else. And so those colors represented the wholeness of our living. And then a couple of years ago, though, there have actually been a lot of different variations on the flag. You may have seen the transgender flag, which is light blue and light pink and white stripes. But a couple of years ago, an artist by the name of Daniel Quasar created his own update to the pride flag, which he called the Progress Pride flag. And so with the Progress Pride flag, it adds 5 half-size stripes, kind of as an additional stripes, not just adding at the top or the bottom, but on the side and moving forward, you know, an arrow pointing in one direction, which represents progress. And the colors of those 5 different stripes, as I mentioned earlier, the light blue, the light pink, and the white represent the trans flag. And the black and the brown stripes represent marginalized people of color communities. And the black flag also has an additional meaning of those living with AIDS and those no longer living, and who have lost their lives to that, and the stigma surrounding them. And so I think it's useful to update our symbols to constantly, as we constantly seek a deeper justice, a greater love, to be constantly thinking and moving. That doesn't mean that this flag necessarily has to replace the other one. It is just an alternative among many. There's also flags for people who are asexual and pansexual, and a whole gamut of flags that are available that really speak to the beautiful diversity of who we are as people. Let's say our unison affirmation together. We are Unitarian Universalists, a people of open minds, loving hearts, and welcoming hands.
As we prepare to take our offering this morning, I'd like to acknowledge that these are complicated times in which people are both struggling financially due to COVID and its impact on the economy, and at the same time being called to greater generosity, a desire to step up and be part of the fight for racial justice, leading to record donations to racial justice groups, bail funds, and Black-led advocacy organizations. And while that is heartening, I find that there's a temptation to focus on scarcity, concerns about where to give, who needs it more. But instead, let's take this time to celebrate this as a new awakening, a chance to reevaluate our priorities as a culture, with a greater emphasis on how each of us can contribute to making the world a better place. Contributions will now be gratefully accepted. They can be made at donate.emersonuuc.org or via the Give Plus mobile app, or checks can be mailed to the church.
From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, and from this we live.
The impact of the COVID-19 pandemic is real for all of us. And I know many of us are concerned as the numbers continue to rise. And it seems like so many aren't taking it seriously enough. And its impact is real, whether we are touched by it directly or indirectly. This morning, as we have been, we share a ritual to recognize deaths due to COVID-19, to note the particular pain of grieving in isolation, as well as to lift up gratitude for all those working on the front lines. There we go. And I invite you to raise your hand in a blessing. We light this candle in honor of all of those working on the front lines, in hospitals and nursing homes, grocery stores, and gas stations. We light this candle to send our love to those dying in isolation, especially those who we know and those who are loved by those we know. We light this candle to send our love to all of those grieving alone. We light this candle in recognition of the enormity of this pandemic's impact on each of us, on those we love, on everyone, especially those already challenged by poverty, racism, transphobia, ableism, and xenophobia. We light this candle in grief, in honor, in recognition, in love. We are in this together.
There is a love holding me. There is a love holding all that I love. There is a love holding all. I rest in this love. There is a love holding us. There is a love holding all that we love. There is a love holding all. We rest in this love. We rest
Today's reading is called On a Holy Night in 1969 by Otto O'Connor. On a holy night in 1969, in an inn, also known as a bar, called the Stonewall Inn, a basement which had no running water nor safe fire exits, queer people of many colors and kinds danced together, for it was the only place where they were allowed to dance, at least permitted to by the mafia who ran the inn. In those days, it was common for the police to frequent this inn, not to join in the dance, the underground celebration, but to send the dancers home and make arrests. When they would arrive, the lights would go on, the people would be lined up, and then all those in drag, all those who were trans, all those without proper identification, they were arrested and taken into custody. But on this holy night, that early morning of June 28th, the people said, "Not tonight." As they called to them to line up, the trans women refused to go. And as the police began to beat and arrest them, and as the people spilled out from the bar onto the street, Christopher Street, a crowd grew to watch. And then, as trans women, lesbians, and gay men were getting arrested, a yell came from the crowd, "Gay power." And as a trans woman was shoved, she shoved back, and the crowd began throwing bottles at the wagon. And suddenly it erupted. For once, the people didn't line up. For once, the people said, "No more, we've had enough." It was almost as if that night, being pulled out of the darkness of the underground at the Stonewall Inn, one too many times, they said, "I'm ready to be seen." On this holy night, when the power of the oppressed rippled through the streets of New York, when queer people said, "No more," our world would never be the same. 50 years ago, it was illegal to be gay, to be trans, to dance and to love and to celebrate. And now, only 50 years later, here we are celebrating at a church. Gay and straight together, queer and straight together, trans and cis together, all in this together. And so as we hear these stories of life and love and defiance and celebration, let us also remember and pay tribute to our movement ancestors, many of them trans women of color who led the first rebellion that night. You see, Pride is a celebration of that anniversary, the anniversary of that riot at the Stonewall Inn in New York City, a holy night.
In 1978, San Francisco Supervisor Harvey Milk, the first openly gay person to be elected to office in the United States and a champion of gay rights, was assassinated along with Mayor George Moscone. That night, tens of thousands of people gathered for a vigil. Driving down to the vigil, the activist and singer-songwriter Holly Near wrote the song "Singing for Our Lives." As Near said of one of the verses, "That night, we all sang, 'We are gay and lesbian people.' And for many, it was the first time they had said those words out loud to themselves about themselves. And then the song flew out and allies began to sing it, and the words were changed to 'We are gay and straight together.' Those are the words that are in our hymnal as it's published. And then she continues, we learned a lot more about sexuality and gender, and now I can't fit all the words into the meter of this song. But whatever door you walk through to your very essence, just know that we see you. And now we sing, we are all in this together.
We are a gentle, angry people, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are a gentle, angry people, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are a justice-seeking people, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are a justice-seeking people, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are young and old together, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are young and old together, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are a land of many colors, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are a land of many colors, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are all in this together, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are all in this together, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are a gentle, loving people, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are a gentle, loving people, and we are singing, singing for our lives.
The poem When My Brother Fell was written by Essex Hemphill for his friend, the activist and writer Joseph Beam, who died of AIDS in 1988. It is a call to political action. In one part of the poem, for context, I think, Hemphill critiques the AIDS memorial quilt, which had started the previous year to memorialize and celebrate the lives of those who died from AIDS. Hemphill expresses that the quilt wasn't enough at a time when so many people were still dying because the government didn't care enough about the deaths of gay people, particularly gay Black men like Beam and himself. Hemphill would later die from AIDS in 1995. When My Brother Fell, for Joseph Beam. When my brother fell, I picked up his weapons and never once questioned whether I could carry the weight and grief, the responsibility he shouldered. I never questioned whether I could aim or be as precise as he. He had fallen, and the passing ceremonies marking his death did not stop the war. Standing at the front lines, flanked by able brothers who miss his eloquent courage, his insistent voice urging us to rebel, urging us not to fear embracing for more than sex, for more than kisses and notches in our belts. Our loss is greater than all the space we fill with prayers and praise. He burned out his pure life force to bring us a chance to love ourselves with commitment. He knew the simple spilling of seed would not be enough to bind us. It is difficult to stop marching, Joseph, impossible to stop our assault. The tributes and testimonies in your honor flare up like torches. Every night a light blazes for you in one of our hearts. When I stand on the front lines now, cussing the lack of truth, the absence of willful change and strategic coalitions, I realize sewing quilts will not bring you back nor save us. It's too soon to make monuments for all we are losing, for the lack of truth as to why we are dying. Who wants us dead? What purpose does it serve? When my brother fell, I picked up his weapons. I didn't question whether I could aim or be as precise as he. A needle and thread were not among the things I found. And now, an excerpt from the film How to Survive a Plague, the 2012 Academy Award nominated documentary about the struggle of AIDS activists in the 80s and 90s to combat the AIDS crisis and get effective treatment at a time when the government didn't care.
To be that threatened with extinction, and to not lay down, but instead to stand up and to fight back. The way we did it, the way we took care of ourselves and each other, the goodness that we showed, the humanity that we showed the world is just mind-boggling, just incredible.
Every single drug that's out there is because of ACT UP. I am convinced. We have the brain power and we have the street power. We have the good cops and the bad cops. The government didn't get us the drugs. No one else got us the drugs. We, ACT UP, got those drugs out there. It is the proudest achievement that the gay population of this world can ever claim.
We could do it because we could deliver hundreds and sometimes of thousands of bodies. We had people with AIDS putting their bodies on the line, flopping out in the street saying, "Fine, this is my body, take me away."
Looking back at 51 years since the Stonewall riots, or the Stonewall uprising, as it is often called. From today's perspective, it has often felt like the movement for justice and equality for the LGBT community has been one of forward progress consistently, of ever greater acceptance for queer and trans folks. We have come a long way in half a century. Indeed, we've come a long way in 20 years. My first experience of Pride was marching with my church in the Long Beach Pride Parade in the early 2000s, the second largest in the state after San Francisco, at a time shortly after Proposition 22, which said that only marriage between a man and a woman is valid or recognized in California, was still the law of the land. The March 2000 election when that overwhelmingly passed 61% to 39% was the last election before I turned 18. As a queer young adult, it was powerful to be marching in that pride parade with my church. It filled me with a feeling of, well, pride. Celebrating Pride in 2008, mere days after the state Supreme Court declared that same-sex couples had a constitutional right to marry, had an entirely different feeling, one of great celebration, even as Proposition 8, in which voters would again, but not overwhelmingly this time, take away the rights of same-sex couples to marry, was already on the ballot that fall. But that was nothing compared to celebrating Pride in 2013 in San Francisco, just 4 days after the Supreme Court struck down Proposition 8, permanently making marriage equality the law of the land in California. What a giant celebration that was. Even as we were reminded that discrimination against queer and trans people in the workplace, with housing and medical care and more, was still legal in many states. This Pride Month, with Monday's Supreme Court ruling making it illegal to fire someone because of their sexual orientation or gender identity, is another huge win, one which sets a strong precedent for further expanding rights for LGBTQ people. Looking back, the movement towards ever greater rights for LGBTQ folks has started to feel like something of an inevitability. Yet in between each of those pride parades, there was a lot of marching and protesting and organizing and fighting. I remember making phone calls and canvassing for the No on 8 campaign and the defiant march through the streets of Long Beach, along with thousands of other protesters, the night after the 2008 election, filled with pain and anger and hope and knowledge that sooner or later this too would change. Yet hearing these stories of Stonewall and AIDS activists, we are reminded that justice and progress weren't inevitable, and that many of these struggles were incredibly hard won, and much was lost along the way. Pride has always been a celebration and a struggle. In July 1969, just days after the Stonewall riots or uprising, which did not last for one night, but 6 nights of increasingly large protests. A few days later, the Gay Liberation Front, or GLF, was formed. And this really marks the beginning of the modern LGBT movement. And the GLF had a broad political platform that went well beyond gay rights, that also denounced racism and declared its support for various liberation struggles in the US and abroad. They took an anti-capitalist stance and also criticized traditional gender roles and the idealization of a nuclear family as being too narrow. And on June 28, 1970, on the first anniversary of the Stonewall riots, the GLF was one of the organizers of the first Pride parades, which took place in New York, San Francisco, and Los Angeles, which then spread across the country. Now, a side note, did you know, though, that in 1979, 2 years before Stonewall, Los Angeles actually had the first organized protests, not a riot, but first organized protests against police harassment of LGBT people in the country after a New Year's Eve raid on the Black Cat Tavern. And even before that, there were other groups like the Mattachine Society, the Janus Society, and the Daughters of Bilitis, which organized and held protests for gay rights. But unlike the Gay Liberation Front and other organizations and the movement that would arise out of the Stonewall riots, they had taken a more conservative approach, with clean-cut men protesting in suits and ties in front of the White House and other places, so as to seem more mainstream and less threatening to a population that saw them as deviant. And those were important steps, but they also didn't have a space for those who chafed under traditional gender roles, or for Black and Latinx folks. And the poor, and those who've been tossed out by their families and were living on the streets and turning to sex work to support themselves because it was the only way they could. Those were the people there in the basement of the Stonewall Inn that night who said, "Not tonight, not anymore. We're not going to hide. We are going to declare gay power out in the streets." And yet, I saw, I think particularly, and it's been an ongoing dynamic, but for me, I noticed it during my lifetime that there seemed to be a big push by many within the movement who wanted to make LGBTQ people more palatable to the general population. Maybe more accurately, wanted to make LGB people more palatable to the general population. Many queer and trans people left out, so that wins could be made around marriage equality. And during that time, there was a push to tame pride. But that required sidelining people who didn't fit the suburban ideal of happily committed or married couples with kids, who are probably also white, where both parents just happen to be gay or lesbian. And of course, I want to affirm and promote this image as wonderful and beautiful and worthy of celebration. One of my best friends growing up had two moms. Well, technically they were his mom and his aunt, because it was still the 1980s. But that push left out people who felt too constrained by what our society said was normal. But you didn't think you'd be seeing that on a Sunday morning. It leaves out so many people like the queer and trans, Black and Latinx folks who participated in the drag ball scene in the 1980s New York. With house mothers taking in other queer and trans kids who had no place else to go because their families had kicked them out onto the streets. And these house mothers would bring those youth in. It left out the gay men and trans women raising their voices in righteous anger, and not politically tidy and neat and polite demonstrations, but deep anger over the devastation wrought by AIDS when the government didn't care about them. Before the rainbow flag became the dominant sign of the LGBT movement, it was the pink triangle, a symbol that was originally used by the Nazis to identify and persecute homosexuals, and had been reclaimed as a symbol of remembrance and resistance against persecution. ACT UP combined that symbol, turned right side up, with the phrase "silence equals death" as a centerpiece to their campaign to get treatment and support for those living and dying with AIDS. The early struggles for justice were messy and loud and confrontational, and they saved lives and shifted the conversation and paved the way for the victories we are seeing now. And yet there are still struggles that sit in front of us. As I mentioned just last week, or a week and a half ago, Donald Trump proposed plans that would allow doctors to prevent trans people from trans and queer people from seeking medical support in the midst of a pandemic that threatens everyone's lives. And of course, there's the ongoing crisis of predominantly queer or predominantly Black and Latinx trans women, and in some cases trans men, who are killed all too frequently. Just in the past few weeks, Dominique Fells, Tony McDade, Rhea Milton, Selena Reyes Hernandez, in grieving over the many who were killed at the shooting at the Pulse nightclub just 4 years ago during Pride Month. We still have a ways to go. And so, as we struggle and fight for greater equality, for more justice, for a deeper love, may we not hold back. May we remember, as LA's Pride was transformed this past weekend, that all Black lives matter. And this was intentional, an intentional phrase to include the fact that all Black lives matter, not just those that are deemed acceptable. It's the same thing as within the LGBT community. All lives, not just ones that society doesn't feel made uncomfortable, society on the whole doesn't feel made uncomfortable by, all lives. And so as we struggle again for that greater justice, that deeper love towards a world transformed and where every soul is welcomed as a blessing, may we remember to mourn and to celebrate and to protest in all of its messiness and its glory and its beauty. That is what pride is about. May it be so. Our closing song this morning is Keep On Moving Forward. Gonna keep on moving forward. Keep on moving forward. Keep on moving forward. Never turning back. Never turning back. Gonna keep on moving proudly. Keep on moving proudly. Keep on moving proudly. Never turning back. Never turning back. Gonna keep on singing loudly. Keep on singing loudly. Keep on singing loudly. Never turning back. Never turning back. Gonna keep on loving boldly. Keep on loving boldly. Keep on loving boldly. Never turning back. Never turning back. We're gonna keep on moving forward. Keep on moving forward. Keep on moving forward. Never turning back. Never turning back. You know, listening to that song, which was really hard to record, gives me a lot of I'm very impressed with someone who do those a cappella recordings, because trying to record something a cappella with hand claps and not singing is really challenging, and it also really makes me miss being able to sing and make music with you all, because I know it would have sounded that much more powerful with you all. As we close, may you go forward, may you go forth from this space knowing that you are held by a deep love, that your life is a blessing to this world, that your body is holy, that you are worthy of dignity and so much more. May we help weave a future where this truth need not be named, because every child, whatever their myriad and beautiful identities, will know it from the day they are born.